And so I hope that that's still happening. Yeah, don't lose your rock, you know what I'm saying? Don't lose your sway, because that was just, it was really fun. But yeah, I heard you guys singing, and I just love that. You guys have amazing voices, or you hide well behind somebody, because you sound great. So anyways. All right, so we are teaching through the Pentateuch. We kind of took a break because we went to camp, and then we talked about camp. So we're back in the Pentateuch, which is, does anyone remember what the Pentateuch is? Yes, sir. Oh boy. Yeah, the first five books of the Bible. What we're doing is, Damn. What's this guy? What we're doing is we're talking about the people of the Pentateuch, not so much just the books. And so Holly, when I talked about who we were going to be able to teach on, Holly heard Joseph, and she's like, "Hey, I want to do that one." So I was like, "All right, let's go." So without further ado, let's go to Holly.
Watched that DreamWorks movie, like a lot. And I love that movie, it's really great. So we're just gonna watch the movie. Okay? I'm ready to watch the movie. Okay, so we're gonna be in Genesis 37, still, who's gonna deal with it? Genesis 37 all the way through 41. And I'm just gonna kind of talk through the story a little bit. I have 2 weeks on Joseph. I'm so happy about it. So I'm going to do half of Joseph today, half of Joseph next week, and hopefully they'll be cohesive, fairly cohesive. So Joseph, so we've talked about Abraham, right? I feel like it's going to fall off. We talked about Abraham. Remember Abraham? Yes, just nodding if you don't know who that is. Okay, good. And Abraham and Sarah had Isaac, right? They were super old, had Isaac. And then Isaac married a gal named Rebecca, and they had Jacob. And then Jacob was renamed Israel and married Rachel and had Joseph. He also married 3 other women and had a lot of other sons. All right? Okay, so Abraham and Sarah, Isaac, right? You got that? Okay? Rebecca and Isaac got married, had Jacob, and then Jacob is Joseph's dad. So we're 3 generations past Abraham. Plus a lot of wives and like cousins marrying cousins, all that fun stuff. So now we have Joseph. So we're going to go to Genesis 37. I'm going to actually read from my Bible today. Okay, I'm going to start in verse 2 and read through verse 4. So it says, Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock of his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. I've never said that out loud. His father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Okay, so we've got this kid named Joseph. He's the youngest one of this set of brothers. I think there's 11 of them, or 10 plus Joseph. 12? Thank you, Rebecca. 12. Plus Joseph? Benjamin hasn't been born yet. He comes later. Okay, so I was right. 11. We got 11 brothers. Yeah, Rebecca. All right. So we have Joseph. He has a lot of brothers, is my point. And he's the favorite. And he's also a tattletale. If you have siblings, you know that's not a smart plan. If you don't want to get pummeled later. All right? So don't tattletale. Jacob, the dad, loves Joseph more than any of the other sons, which also is not great to have favorites. And Jacob makes Joseph a coat of many colors to signify how much he loves him. And this isn't like now when like your mom sews you something on her sewing machine. It's like, look, I made it. And you're like, oh no, do I have to wear that? This is like everybody has one outfit forever. And so if he has this amazing coat with so many different colors, it probably took a ton of money, a lot of investment, something that none of the other brothers are ever going to get. So this is really a symbol of like, this is the son that is set apart. He's the favorite. He's more than anyone else. And that does not make the brothers super happy. So and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. His brothers said to him, are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. So Joseph has this weird dream, and instead of keeping it to himself, he goes over to his brothers and is like, hey guys, I dreamed that all of you are going to end up bowing down to me. So this is even more than like the favorite is telling us we're going to have to bow down to him. This is our baby brother who comes back and says, guys, I know you're my older brothers, but you're going to have to bow down to us eventually. You're going to have to bow down to me eventually. And his brothers don't appreciate this. And so Joseph, being super smart, has another dream and tells his brothers again. So going down to verse 9, he says, then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. So the first dream didn't go over super well, right? The brothers were like, oh, that's not cool. I'm not okay with that. So Joseph has another dream, goes straight back to his brothers and like, hey guys, you know that dream you hated? I had another one, and I'm going to tell you about it again. And his brothers still don't appreciate it. And this time, even his father is like, dude, keep it to yourself. Do you want to get pounded? Like, this is not going down well with your brothers. Like, just keep it to yourself. Don't talk about it anymore. So then, later that year, I don't know, after that, Joseph is sent out to get his brothers. So his brothers are like working out in a field, and they're working like far off from their house. And so Joseph starts walking towards them, and they see him coming, and they're like, guys, he's coming out by himself to get us. And Dad can't see him, so if we kidnap him and stick him in this pit, no one would ever know. And of course the other brothers are like, great, perfect, we'll do that. And so they steal his coat, they throw him in the pit, and then this group of Ishmaelites come by, they're traveling to Egypt, and they say, hey, do you want this kid down in this pit? And they're like, sure. And so they buy him, take him to Egypt, and the brothers kill a goat, soak his coat in the blood, and then give it back to their dad and say, look, Joseph died. Isn't that a bummer? So if we skip all the way down to verse 35, Jacob is mourning over his son, and it says, all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. So I want you to imagine this dad who is just like doted on his son, like he loves him so much. He has made it clear to his wife, to his other wives, to his other children, this is his favorite son. And then his son is allegedly killed. Like, we know he's actually still alive, but Jacob doesn't know. And he's sitting there holding this coat, crying and refusing to be comforted. His sons and his daughters try, his wives are probably trying, and Jacob refuses to be comforted. This is a super powerful picture to me. Because Jacob is sitting there, refusing to be comforted, demonstrating this unconditional, irrevocable, incredible love for his son. He's saying, I will not be comforted. There's nothing that can replace this love I have for my child. And that's super powerful to me personally, because I just watched my aunt and uncle, well, we're still in the process of grieving over the loss of their son. So my aunt and uncle, a year ago, they lost their son who was older than me at the time. I'm now older than him, in a motorcycle accident. And watching them grieve over their son was intense. Like, this is gonna be a part of our lives forever now. Like, this is just where we're at. But watching them grieve over him just showed how intense their love was for him. Like, they would do anything to have him back. So I want you to imagine that type of love that Jacob has for his son, that my aunt and uncle have had for my cousin. And then I want you to take that picture and put God in that father position, and then yourself in that child position. That is the intense love that God has for you, that he would say, I love you so much that I will take my son, who I love, and I will sacrifice him for you. He chose to give up his son. The same, like he loved his son more than Jacob loves Joseph, more than my aunt and uncle loved their son. And God said, I know I have this son who is perfect and beautiful and righteous, and I'm going to sacrifice him so that I can have all of you with me in eternity. Isn't that incredible? Like, I don't ever think about the grief that God had in that moment when Jesus died for us. It's become so normal to me. And I feel like as we're in church, we hear that so often, like you're a 5-year-old and you're like, cool, Jesus died on the cross. Like you don't really think about how bloody and grief-filled and horrible it was. But God chose to do that for us. He said, it's worth it. I'm going to sacrifice my son so that I can have you with me. All right, so chapter 38. We're just going to go ahead and skip that chapter for now. We'll come back to it. Moving forward to chapter 39. So Jacob is mourning back in Canaan, and he's going to mourn for 22 years. He's not going to find out that Joseph is still alive for 22 years. He's just going to live with that grief. And actually, if you skip all the way forward to where Joseph and Jacob are reunited, it says in the verse that Jacob's soul was finally revived. So that implies that a part of Jacob was dead for those 22 years. Like, he never recovered from the death of Joseph. And it wasn't until he saw Joseph that his soul was revived. Which, again, is just so powerful, that love that the Father has for the Son. Okay, so now we're in Genesis 39. And Joseph has been taken to Egypt. He was sold to Potiphar, he's an officer of Pharaoh, so he's a pretty high up there. And it says in verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph and he became a successful man. So he's doing really well. He's kind of overseeing Potiphar's house. He's in charge of things. He's running things well. It says Potiphar didn't have to do anything except eat. Like he could just Joseph took care of everything. Potiphar didn't have to worry about it. But then Potiphar's wife realizes that Joseph is super cute. And so she's like, oh, that's fun. Like, let's see what happens with that. She tries to seduce him. Joseph says no. Joseph says no a couple more times. The wife is like offended and like, no, I'm beautiful. You have to let me. And then she accuses Joseph of rape, and Joseph is thrown in prison. All right, so we've gone from Joseph was thrown in a pit, sold into slavery. Then he rises up in Potiphar's house. And then he goes back down, accused of something that he did not do, and put in prison. So we're going to go down to verses 21 through 23. So Joseph just got thrown in prison. We're in chapter 39, verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. So, did you notice twice in this chapter it says Joseph was successful because the Lord was with him. So God made Joseph successful in Potiphar's house, and now he's successful in prison. But what I think is so funny is that Joseph is in prison. Like, he's in prison. So I would have a really hard time being in prison and be like, wow, I'm successful. I feel confident about where my life is going. I think I'm doing a really good job. I'm just a successful individual here in prison. That's not really where my brain would go, right? But this is the second time that Joseph is referred to as a success. And it's not because his life is going great, or because he has a lot of power and he's making his own decisions, or because he is like super rich and has all these houses in Egypt. He's a success because the Lord was with him. It says the Lord was with him in Potiphar's house, and therefore he was successful. And then he said the Lord was with him in prison, and he made him succeed. So God's definition of success here is incredibly different from our own. I always have, my version of success changes depending on the day. So if I'm in a good mood, I'm like, ooh, I'm God and I'm super successful. If I'm in a bad mood, I'm like, wow, I'm failing at everything. But that definition of success is not our own. That's totally God. Like, he gets to decide if your life is successful or not. And all you have to do is submit to his will, and if he's with you, then you are successful. It doesn't matter if you're in prison or not. God's version of successful for Joseph was working diligently in prison for years for a crime that he didn't commit. Like, that's kind of a bummer. Like, even if he's really good at his job in prison, that still doesn't seem like a success to me, the fact that he was put in prison for something he didn't do. But if you realize that success is God's, like, he's going to define that for you, and there's a ton of freedom in that realization. Because the world says, you need to work hard, you need to make a ton of money, you need to get up here in this job, or you need to do this in school. But that's not what success is. Success is submitting your life to Jesus and saying, however you define success for me, that's where I want to be. All right, so moving on to chapter 41. So Joseph has been in prison for a while. And he's in prison with these two guys that worked for Pharaoh, and both of them have dreams. And he he interprets the dreams for these two guys, for the cupbearer and for the baker. So they're both guys that worked for Pharaoh. And both of his interpretations for these guys come true. And the cupbearer is released back to his job in Pharaoh's palace, and the baker is also released, but he's killed because he was guilty of the crime. So that's kind of a bummer for him. But the cupbearer gets to go back and work for Pharaoh. And Joseph says, please, please, please tell Pharaoh about me. And the cupbearer is like, yeah, I got you. You got me out of prison. You interpreted the dream correctly. It's great. I'll tell Pharaoh. And then 2 years go by. And Joseph is like, okay, cool. Like, you totally forgot about me. But then Pharaoh has a dream, and none of Pharaoh's advisors can interpret it for him. Like, no one knows what it means. And the cupbearer finally remembers Joseph, and Joseph is brought up out of prison into Pharaoh's presence. And Joseph tells Pharaoh that the dream that he had means that Egypt is about to have 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine. So they're going to have plenty of food for 7 years. Crops are going to grow great. They're going to have a lot of grapes in the vineyard. That's all I got. Yep, a lot of grapes. And then there's going to be 7 years of nothing. Like, they're not going to be able to grow anything. The cows are going to all die. Like, there's not going to be anything. And so Joseph suggests to Pharaoh that he should put someone in charge of saving 1/5 of the crops for the next 7 years, so that when the famine comes, they're going to have enough to feed their families and feed all of Egypt. And Pharaoh thinks this is a pretty good idea. So he puts Joseph in charge. And he actually puts him in charge, gives him a wife, a new name, like everything. Like, he sets up Joseph super well. And Joseph is only 30 years old at this point. He's been through a lot. And also, he's fairly successful at this point. Like, if you look at it through the world's perspective, he's been through a lot, but now we're at the point where he has a lot of power, he's got a wife, he's got a house. And after 7 years of plenty, the famine comes and covers the land. And so Joseph was also correct in this, which is good. And Joseph is able to feed all of Egypt through the food that he stored up over the 7 years of plenty. So people are coming from all over Egypt to get food from Joseph, and then people start coming from the surrounding countries as well, because the famine is so terrible. So it didn't just hit Egypt. It actually says it was like a whole world famine. So that includes all of Joseph's family back in Canaan. So in Genesis chapter 42, Joseph's brothers wander into Egypt looking for help, because they were not prepared for the famine. And they were also not prepared to see Joseph, which is what we're going to talk about next week. But before we move on, go all the way back to chapter 38, that random chapter that we skipped. So when I was studying, I was reading through these chapters, and I was like rehearsing the movie in my head, because I'm still DreamWorks version of Joseph, right? And this chapter 38 was not included in the DreamWorks movie, like at all. Like, there are some terrible things in Genesis 38. Like, some things that are not very specific, like the son of Judah was so evil that God just struck him down. And then the other son of Judah, also pretty bad dude, God just killed him off also. And then there's other things in there that are so specific that I feel uncomfortable reading them to you, so I'm not going to read them to you. Like, these are like bad things that are happening. And all of these things they're talking about things that are happening back in Canaan. So this entire time, Joseph is in Egypt, like setting up he worked in prison for a while, he worked in Potiphar's house, now he's working for Pharaoh. And back in Canaan, in chapter 38, things are not going super hot for these brothers. Like, they're not doing great. There's incest, adultery, probably a lot of other things that aren't specifically mentioned. The family just isn't managing life super well. But meanwhile, while all these things are happening in Canaan, God is preparing Joseph, miles away in Egypt, to save them when the famine hits. Like, they don't even know that Joseph is over there in Egypt. They have no idea what happened to him. He could have died for all they know. But Joseph is over in Egypt, preparing for the time when those brothers are going to need his help again. They have no idea that they're totally screwing up their lives and not preparing for the famine that's coming. And some of them are just like dying, because God's like, wow, that's too bad, strikes them down. And yet God is still preparing a way out for their family. He's also providing for them what they need before they even realize it. Like, they have no idea what's coming. The famine comes and they're like, oh crud, what are we going to do? I guess we better go to Egypt. And I love this picture in Genesis 38 because I feel like I am totally the brothers. I'm like, I'd love to be like Joseph. I'd love to be the one that's like gone through this terrible thing and then is lifted up in this amazing way to serve Jesus and like be in like 47 chapters of the Bible. But I'm way more like the brothers who did this really awful thing, aren't talked about except for one chapter, and then come like back eventually going, okay, I screwed up, I need help. Like that's so much more me. So the brothers did something terrible, right? They sold their brother into slavery. And they never confessed that to their dad. So they kind of just pushed it away from themselves and tried to move on without it. And that comes with a lot of consequences. Like, have you ever done something and tried to lie to your parents about it? Ansley's face says, yes. It's not good. It like, I don't care how long you manage to go without telling anybody, it will like eat at you. It doesn't matter how big or little it is. Like, I always end up telling someone, like, if I fall up the stairs at work, I immediately like turn around and tell someone. I'm like, I did the stupidest thing right there. Did you guys see that? And probably no one did. But now everyone knows because I tell everyone. Like, you just have to tell someone. Like, it will eat away at you. So imagine that horrible guilt of the brothers. Like, they pretended to kill their brother. They sold him into slavery, and they haven't told their parents. And then second, they're making some really bad choices. Like, they are just totally walking away from their faith at this point. If you go back and read chapter 38, like there's just some bad stuff that's happening. Which, this is kind of me stretching it a little bit, but I imagine that because of that guilt, they're trying to do anything they can to get away from it. They're trying to forget about it. They're trying to drink or sleep around or do whatever they can to just forget the fact that they did something really terrible back there. They don't want to look at it. They just want to get away from it. And also, if you've tried that before, it doesn't work so well. So these brothers are over here choosing sin over and over again, continually, and meanwhile, God is preparing a way out. They haven't even asked for a way out. They're not even looking for a way out. And He is planning for the day when the famine hits, and they can't do anything, and their families are going to die, and they will have to ask for help, and God is ready. He's going to be there and say, look, go to Egypt. Joseph is there. He was planning for the last 7 years because you guys are all idiots, and He's going to feed you and take care of you. And to me, this is like an incredible picture of Jesus. So we're the brothers over there like sitting in our own muck going, no, it wasn't that bad. We'll just keep doing it, and we'll feel better, and it won't be that bad. And we're trying to block out the possibility of anything bad happening. And then the famine hits, and we're like, oh no. Like, we are not prepared. We're not ready. We don't know how to get out. And God, meanwhile, has planned for our good and His glory an escape route that will result in not only us being saved, but feeling loved and cherished and wanted. Because while we were still sinning, Christ went and died for us. It wasn't when we said, okay, we'll clean it up. Then He went and died for us. It was while we were still sinning. We were terrible. He knew exactly what we were going to do, and He still chose to die for us. So while we were still Joseph's brothers, messing around in Canaan, refusing to admit that they felt bad for fake murdering their brother, God was still, He was ready, preparing Jesus to come down and save us. Isn't that incredible, you guys? That's so crazy to me. And it's not because we realized that we needed someone. We never got to the point where we were like, oh, wait, I think we need a Savior. I don't think we're going to be able to get out of here by ourselves. It was because God knew from the beginning that we would need a Savior. It wasn't us. We were like, oh, we should probably write a letter to God and be like, well, I think you should consider sending someone down here. But it's not getting any better. He was preparing from the beginning to save us. So, I have 2 minutes. So before we end, I have one last observation about Joseph. So as I've mentioned before, I really like the DreamWorks version. You need to go watch it. It's a great movie. But in that movie, the beginning portrays Joseph as like this sweet little younger brother that really wants to be friends with his older brothers, and his older brothers are just the worst. And they are like, no, we don't want you here. And Joseph is like, please. And they're like, no. And then they like sell him into slavery, and you're like, wow, those brothers are the worst people. But as I was studying through the scripture, I made a realization that I had not come to before. Joseph was a total butt. Like, he was not a good dude. He rubbed his father's favoritism in their faces. He was like, I'm the favorite. I've got the cool coat. I'm awesome. That was a bad decision. Like, you should have seen that one coming. Maybe not like the fake murder and everything, but something was going to happen. Like, this is not the story about this angelic little boy that went through this terrible time and then rose up and saved all of Egypt. Like, he was a sinner also. He messed it up. Like, if you guys have ever fought with your siblings, which maybe I'm the only one, that's okay. I'll own up to it. It is always 50% your fault, right? Maybe you didn't do anything, but maybe you rise to the occasion and all of a sudden your temper's all over the place. 50% you. If you're in an argument, that is 50% you. Don't tell me it isn't. Joseph was the worst, and his brothers hated him. There were two people in that situation. Like, it was 50% Joseph, but it was also the brothers, and they both had to deal with the consequences of that. But God also used the consequences of all their sin for miraculous and incredible things. Joseph totally screwed up, and so did his brothers, but God's sovereignty covered all of it and used all of it. I think this is my last page of notes. Still really long. Oh no, I have another one. Wow, okay. And maybe you're like me. Maybe you're like me and you're thinking, okay, maybe most of the time, 50%, it's my fault. But maybe sometimes it's not my fault. Maybe someone's just really a turd and they just mess up and then I have to deal with the consequences. Like, why should that be on me? Maybe you're not the one that messed up. But here's the reality. If you sin against someone, you deal with the consequences. If someone sins against you, you also deal with the consequences. Like, we're just all dealing with the consequences always. If there's some sort of sin, there are consequences that are going to affect all of us. For example, I recently got super hurt by two of my friends. Like, it was bad. Like, we're not friends anymore. I can't talk to them. I don't know exactly what happened, but yeah, there's just no going back to that one. Like, reconciliation would be awesome, but at this point, like, I don't have the capacity. Like, I think about it and I'm like, that would be really great if we could fix that. And I'm like, I can't even articulate exactly what happened. It was really bad. And it was heartbreaking because they were really close to me. Like, they were my closest community for a long time. And I've been trying to process what happened, and I'm going, okay, maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I didn't handle it well. Maybe I should have been more careful. But no matter how I try and balance it out, I know I got sinned against in that situation. And I'm sure my sin played into it. I know I'm not perfect. My mom told me yesterday, it's not always about you, and you're not always right. And I was like, that's so hurtful. And she said it so nice too. She was like, sweetie, there's two things I want you to remember in your life. And I was like, it's going to be like, Jesus loves you and you're beautiful. No, I get it's not all about you. And you're not always right. And I was like, okay, Mom. But I'm right a lot of the time. A lot. Like 98%. And the other 2% I'll convince you that I'm right. Like, I'm aware that I'm not perfect. Like, I'm sure I had some part of that. But I also know that some terrible thing happened, and now I'm dealing with the consequences of it. And there was definite sin done against me, and now I have to live with the consequences. I'm trying to work through that, and regardless of whether or not I handled it well, I still have to live with the results of it. Like, it's still just a mess in my life that I don't know what to do with. I still have to deal with the aftermath. So my point is, if it's your sin, her sin, his sin, whatever, we all have to deal with the consequences of that. So even if Joseph had totally been an angel the entire time, he still would have had to deal with the consequences of his brother's sin against him. So maybe this week you feel like you're in this terrible place because you made a bunch of bad decisions, and you feel responsible for getting yourself in a mess. And it might be your fault that you're in whatever mess it is. Or maybe you're in a mess because someone else sinned against you. And you're like, I can't believe I'm here. Someone was super mean to me. Elise just keeps laughing and I don't know how to handle it. You know, I don't know what the situation is. Or maybe it's a 50-50 where you and your friend had a fight and you know you're both responsible. And you're in this pit, or you're sold into slavery, or you faked your death for your parents, or whatever. Like, it's not good. I just want you to remember that in looking at Joseph's story, he was dealing with his own sin, his brother's sin. There was lots of consequences for all of that. But regardless of that, God was orchestrating everything to fall in line perfectly with his plan. It wasn't a 2-hour, 2-day process. It wasn't even 2 years. He spent 2 years in prison waiting for someone to remember him. 2 years. Like, I'm not a patient person. I'm like, if it's not done in a week, then what is happening? I'm like, we got to get on it. God has orchestrated your life perfectly to use everything that has happened to you, to use everything that you have done for his glory and your good. So regardless of whatever mess you created for yourself, or someone else has created for you, or it's kind of like a collaborative mess, God's sovereignty has covered that, and he's using that for your good and his glory. So I'm going to go ahead and pray for us, and then we're going to go into small groups. Jesus, thank you for allowing me to come up here and talk about you. I just pray for our small groups that we would be able to have good discussion, that would be able to confess where we have sinned against others, and then also be vulnerable about where we feel hurt from other people. And I just pray that we would be able to encourage one another to trust that even though there are consequences in our lives because of that, that you are over everything, that your grace and your glory and your love are going to cover that and fill us and use it for our good and your glory. We're just overwhelmed by your love and that incredible love that would sacrifice your only child for us. We love you and we praise you in your name. Amen.
Someone was really timid. They're like,